So here we are at the Lorraine American Cemetery near a town called Saint-Avold in eastern France. So this is the main memorial building at Lorraine. And it was designed by a guy named Frederick Murphy. And I just love these little backstories about some of the designers and artists and sculptors. So Frederick Murphy was born in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. His father was a tin miner who died when he was very young. And so his mother, now widowed, moved to Chicago. And largely for little Frederick's education. So he enrolled, his mother took over a boarding house in Chicago. And he enrolled in Chicago public schools and went on to take the entrance exam for a very famous design school in Paris called the École des Beaux-Arts. And of course, they would have people from all over France and all over the world competing for an entry spot. And here, little Frederick from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, scored first in the exam and gained entrance to this prestigious school. He went on to chair the architecture department at Catholic University and was especially well known for designing a lot of churches and religious buildings. So you see kind of the fluted sides here, and then just these windows, and as we go inside you'll see how that adds to the light inside. So Lorraine is the largest American World War II cemetery in Europe. The largest overall is in Manila with 16,000 graves. But Lorraine is the largest in Europe with 10,000. So you'll see here, it's pretty extensive grounds. So 10,000. So like Epinal only had two sections, A and B. This goes all the way through to K. So as we enter the memorial here, so sometimes there's a map room and a chapel. In this case, it's kind of combined. So you have, as many of these cemeteries, these incredible map. And sometimes they're done as a mosaic, or sometimes just here as a, it looks like just a carved, but it's like a topographical map, you know, it has a texture to it. And this describes all the battles. I mean, you could stay here all day. And what I'll do instead is just pause this video and study all this, because it's really extraordinary. So the maps were actually designed by the son of a famous French sculptor, and his name was Pierre Bourdelle, and he designed all these amazing maps. And the sculpture in front, actually the sculpture inside and outside. So inside, so these are kind of the five defenders of freedom. So we have King David on the left, and we have Emperor Constantine, and then we have King Arthur and George Washington. And the figure in the middle is meant to be kind of the everyday American soldier who came to Europe for the second time in a generation, in two generations, to rid the world of tyranny. And then you also have more maps. These are maps, I think, featured at all American cemeteries. So just going back to the statue, this was also designed by a man named Michael Lance, and he was a simple sculpture instructor at the Works Progress Administration, which was like a Depression-era public works program. And he submitted a design for the new FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and he submitted a design called Man Restraining Trade, and out of 200 entrants, it won. And so this just sculpture instructor ended up with a statue that still stands today in front of the Federal Trade Commission, and then went on to do commissions like this for American cemeteries. And he also did sculpture on the front here of Saint Avold, who is a Roman Christian martyr, and also a soldier, as evidenced by the sword at his side. Okay, now this is a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to head over to section A. So here we are in section A at the Lorraine Cemetery. So again, you have this incredible layout where the brothers are all, in this case, buried, not all the brothers, but a grouping of them are all buried in the same row. So these are the Baucom brothers from Arkansas, who are not in my book, unfortunately. Here are the Howland brothers from Massachusetts, the Wilkos brothers from New Jersey, the Keegstra brothers from Michigan. These are not brothers. Then we have the Sundahl brothers, who are in my book, who are from Opheim, Montana. I had the great pleasure of meeting John Sundahl, whose father, Clarence, was the sole surviving brother. And he remembered for his whole life the memory of his brothers who are buried here side by side. Of course, we have the Doherty brothers, who are from La Cañada, California. And that's John Doherty. So he died on December 10th, 1943, and the family found out about it right around Christmas time. And for many Christmases afterwards, they would not have a Christmas tree or really celebrate Christmas because it was such a sad time. And these two brothers, who, by the way, both served in the same unit. Joseph joined after his brother was killed and served in the same unit, and he was killed close to the end of the war in 1945. Here we have the Preddy brothers, and of course, George Preddy went on to become the most decorated Mustang pilot in the war. He was so small that he got rejected by the US Navy 3 times to become an aviator. And when he showed up in England, he finally joined the US Army Air Forces. And when he showed up to join his new unit in England, the commanding officer asked, are you sure that skinny little kid can fly? I think he only weighed 125 pounds. Well, he sure could fly. He went on again to be the most decorated Mustang fighter pilot of the war. And his brother, his younger brother Bill, was also a highly decorated fighter pilot. And they were both killed in different actions. Either in George's case, sadly, by friendly fire, and in Bill's case, by enemy fire. So we also have the DeMars brothers from Worcester, Massachusetts. We have a couple sets of brothers from Worcester, Massachusetts. They have a great tradition in Worcester where they name, just about every street and square in Worcester is named after a fallen soldier of some war. And of course, there's a DeMars square named after the DeMars brothers. Roland DeMars was the sole surviving brother. It's a little bit of a story like Saving Private Ryan, where they had to go and find him, and for a while they could not find him. And they finally found him and sent him home, and he was the sole surviving brother. So a couple non-brothers here. We have the Perkins brothers, who are not in my book. So here we have the Phelps brothers from Rives Junction, Michigan. Marshall and Donald Phelps. So there was a third brother also killed in World War II, and he is honored at the North African American Cemetery. He was never found, so he's listed on the walls of the missing. And so this family lost 3 brothers in World War II. And Sidney Phelps was the youngest, and really the only one living at home, and a little bit like the story of the Tester brothers from Tennessee, who also lost 3 brothers You know, it was the youngest brother who often had to go and collect the telegrams and bring them back to his mother with the very sad news. So we have the Zelinsky brothers, who unfortunately are not in my book, and of course the Akamoto brothers, sons of Japanese American immigrants. They were Nisei, second generation. Their father, Masanori Akamoto, had come from Japan, and their mother, Mary Miki Akamoto. And Victor volunteered to serve on December 8th, 1941. So the day after Pearl Harbor, he showed up at the recruiting station and volunteered because he wanted to show how devoted he was to his country and his parents' adopted country. So he volunteered and went to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, where he was eventually joined by his younger brother Johnny and his other younger brother Ted. Now the family's life changed dramatically in April 1942, so just a few months after Victor had volunteered. The whole family was sent to a Japanese internment camp, so they were forced to sell their home, pack away all their belongings, and got sent to an internment camp. And like a lot of Nisei, or second generation Japanese Americans in the camps, the two brothers, Johnny and Ted, just decided to join the U.S. Army. So they joined their older brother at Camp Shelby. And in fact, Johnny got deployed to Europe first, and his older brother Victor, who had promised his mother he would protect his little brother, said, well, I want to go to Europe with him. And they said, well, you can't because you're an officer and you're very important for training all these new Nisei recruits that are arriving at Camp Shelby. And Victor said, well, I'll take a demotion. So he took a demotion to a private. You see, he's a private. And he went to join his brother. Now, sadly, his brother was killed. His brother both served in the 100th. Well, Johnny served in the 100th Infantry Battalion, and Victor served in the 442nd. So those were both Japanese American units. I believe the 442nd is one of the most decorated units of the whole war. Johnny sadly died in Italy, actually of a health condition. I believe he had some sort of an issue with his stomach, and he died. And Victor went on serving, and it was the 442nd who rescued the famous Lost Battalion not far from here in the Vosges Mountains. And Victor was taken prisoner and was put in a prisoner of war camp where his health steadily declined until he died there. And so here are the two brothers. The youngest brother, Ted, one thing Victor made a chaplain promise at Camp Shelby was, hey, never send my youngest brother, Ted, into combat. And they kept that promise. So Ted survived the war and came here when the cemetery first opened in either 1960 or 1962 with his mother for the dedication of the cemetery. And we have an amazing picture of Mary Miki Akamoto standing here in between the burial site of her two sons. We have the Lasher brothers and the Farrell brothers. Unfortunately, are not in my book. Here are the Allsbach brothers, Thomas and Corwin. We're from Akron, Ohio. You'll see it says the state is Arizona, but that's a state a soldier enlisted from. But they were both from Akron and probably enlisted from Arizona because they both worked for the Goodyear Company, which I think had an aircraft factory in Arizona building the Corsair fighters. In fact, the whole family worked for the local hometown company, which was Goodyear. So this is the burial site of two other sets of brothers. So you have here the Rothgeb brothers, who are not in my book, and then the Workin twins. And so what Jeffrey Hayes told us, who's the cemetery superintendent, is that these are both sets of twins buried side by side. And interestingly, both died under similar circumstances, where the Rothgeb brothers apparently died not on the same day, but were hit by the same shell. And of course, that is a similar story to what befell are working twins. So they were from North Dakota, and of course, only their mother could tell them apart. They were identical twins, insisted on serving together, but their commanding officers tried to keep them out of harm's way. So they tried to keep them separated, but they ended up sleeping together one night. It was very icy, cold conditions. They couldn't dig foxholes, so they ended up in the same truck, which was hit by a German artillery shell. And Henry died first immediately, and then William died several days later. And they're buried now side by side at Lorraine. So here we have another couple sets of brothers, the Belinsky brothers, who are from Milwaukee, who unfortunately I was not able to track down. And then we have the Claytor brothers, who are from Glasgow, Virginia. So I had the great pleasure of interviewing Talmadge Claytor, who was a surviving brother of the Claytor brothers, actually fought with his brothers in World War II. He told me that at one point during the Battle of the Bulge, they had the Germans surrounded. And one Claytor brother was to the north, and one was to the west, and one was to the south. Talmadge was the only one to come home among those three brothers. So his two brothers died there. Sherman E. Elwood Claytor, again, and there's other examples of this, he was married and had two kids at home and volunteered because he couldn't stand the thought of being home while his younger brother served. So he volunteered and was killed in the war in January 8th, 1945. I also had the opportunity, and this was the only instance where this was possible, but I actually interviewed Elwood's widow, living widow, Mona. She was close to, I think she was 98 years old, and also his daughter, which was just amazing. And the family just keeps alive the memory of these brothers. There's Eugene. So both died, in 1945. So as the war is kind of winding down, and unfortunately died before it ended. And here they lie in the shadow. You'll see here, just in the shadow of that memorial building on just a beautiful spot here. So here's the gravesite of the Laybrush brothers, Ferdy and Alfred. So they grew up Jewish in Frankfurt and came to America in September 1938, so just 2 months before Kristallnacht. They got out of Germany ahead of Nazi persecution, and they both returned to Europe as American soldiers to rid the continent of the Nazi menace that they had fled. And Ferdy served in the 10th Mountain Division, which earned its renown in Italy at Riva Ridge. And Ferdy rescued 5 wounded soldiers before he himself was killed with a sniper's bullet, an action for which he won the Silver Star. And the family, for years afterward, would get holiday cards from those soldiers who he rescued. So these were the only 2 sons of Willie and Emma Laybrush. And Emma's maiden name was Kahn, and she had a family tree that could trace her family back in Frankfurt 400 years. And yet they had to flee in September 1938. And so after Ferdy was killed in Italy, they desperately tried to get Alfred pulled out of combat, and they contacted everybody, and they were unsuccessful. And he ended up volunteering for a pretty risky mission to do kind of reconnaissance. And they said that it may have been because he was so distraught after losing his only big brother. And so he too was killed in March 1945. So the brothers died just a month apart, the only 2 children of Willie and Emma Laybrush. And here they lie today side by side at the Lorraine American Cemetery.